Hi, and welcome back to The Orange Appeal. I'm Kirti.
I'm Mahita.
And I'm Lauren.
And today we're interviewing Doni Aldine, an Afro-Latina, globally mobile, and first-generation American who's lived in 7 cultures on 5 continents by the age of 19. She's the CEO of Culture's Global Multicultural magazine and a powerful voice in global media, marketing, and identity. Thank you so much for joining us.
And we are so excited
Thank
to have
you.
you on our podcast.
Oh, I'm so excited to be here.
So we're just gonna start with one simple question first. What specific experiences shaped your understanding of what it means to be culturally fluid?
Wow. That is a really good question. There are so many things. Okay. I guess it started at age 2 weeks. So I was born in Brooklyn, New York, Kings County Hospital. At age 2 weeks, I went to Trinidad and Tobago, which is where my mom is from. My first accent was Trinidadian. I ended up I went to Spain first. So we went to Spain when I was 5 or 4, till I was 8. And then I went to New Mexico. And then there's many moves after that. So I would say that was the first pivotal experience. But I really didn't know, cultural fluidity is a term that we developed when I was teaching university at Colorado State University, teaching about media and global culture identity. I didn't even know it was a thing to be a third culture kid, or in my case, an adult third culture kid, until I was about 35 years old. And I read the book, Third Culture Kid Growing Up Among Worlds. And the author of that book is the preeminent author for third culture kid books. And I'm happy to call her my mentor. She's a mentor for many TCKs. But that's probably the first time that I realized how I felt wasn't just me. Some of the things that I thought were quirks of my personality were actually traits of my culture, which is being a third culture person, someone who's grown up in multiple countries and meaningfully experienced multiple cultures. So actually, that's what cultural fluidity is. But the definition for third culture is someone who's grown up outside of their parents' passport countries due to their parents' occupations, right? So a TCK is a big part of who I am. So I would say that's the next major pivotal place, because I didn't know it was a thing before that. Before that, I thought this was just my life and this is how my brother and I grew up. No, but there are 238 million people around the world who have experiences like this.
Definitely like finding that sense of community and belonging. I bet that was like really amazing for you.
Well, that's why we started Cultures, is to create that sense of community and belonging. I mean, you can imagine 238 million people. That's as of 2018. So I know the number is bigger now because it was growing at 20% a year at that time. And you can imagine, spread all over the globe, they're in different communities, not their own community, right? Like a lot of them, like me, didn't even know there was a community like this, or people like this, or people who grew up like them. So if you think of 238 million people, that would be the 5th largest country in the world. It would be Australia plus Canada times 4. So it's a lot of people, but they're all separate. They're all spread out around the globe. So community is important, and that sense of belonging is one that a lot of people don't feel they have. And even if you have that, I mean, I have a ton of communities I belong to, but to be in a place where someone really understands me is difficult. And so that's why we created Cultures.
Right. And like based on this discussion of different cultures, like how do you utilize it and like these new experiences to help you circulate like a better business industry as well, like understanding more people? How does that like relate?
So what's interesting about that is it's inherent to you who you are. If you grew up like this, it's literally built into your DNA that you're usually accommodating, you're usually flexible, you're usually very resilient. You're usually a person who can see multiple sides of a situation and try to bring people together. So you build those bridges, right? Those are things that typically are built into who you are because you grew up that way, right? If you had to change schools all the time, you had to leave your family all the time and leave your friends all the time, make new friends on a dime, you had to learn all these skills on how to understand people. If you're moving to new cultures where things are completely different, you go from a place where it's improper to slurp your soup, and then you end up in a place where it's rude to not slurp and belch at the table and show how great the food is, right? So, you go from this country that doesn't touch each other or barely stands next to each other to the place where you greet people with two kisses on the cheek. Like, you have to learn everything very quickly so that you can fit in. And that just makes you very adaptable. It makes you very aware of your surroundings. It makes you understand people very quickly. And you could see different points of view because you've grown up in so many different points of view.
Yeah, that sounds like such like an essential skill to have growing up, especially because now you're able to have all those experiences growing up. And I was wondering like what advice would you give to like your younger self or what experiences would you give to her if you could now?
Well, someone asked me something similar the other day on a different podcast, and I said I would tell her that just follow your path. You know what you're doing, right? I think the biggest change for me is, people, the thing about being a third culture kid or being culturally fluid is that people think they know who you are because they might know one part of who you are, right? I was talking to another third culture kid on my podcast who is a psychologist. And I was saying how, you have these different pockets of friends that are different pieces of who you are, but nobody knows you all together. That's why, again, cultures exist. So the goal is it would be so wonderful to have someone who got all the parts of you, who understood every part of you very well, right? You didn't have to just cut off these parts and do this at this time. So many people are like, oh, older, adults when you're younger telling you, do this, don't do this, do this. And I pretty much constructed my own path, but I also listen, right? As I got older, what I decided is I would listen and throw away what doesn't work for me. But I always listen because you never know when you're going to get a good piece of advice, right? I listen, I evaluate it, and I say, yeah, that's correct. No, that's not correct. And even in the future, sometimes I'm like, oh, wait, they really were right. Oh, maybe I should pay attention to that. Or, oh, they were really wrong. I'm glad I didn't listen to that, right? And so what I would say to my younger self is, you actually really know what you're doing, even though you're young. Just keep following that path.
Wow, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, okay, I had a question. Um, so you said like going through all these cultures and like experiencing all these different cultures, you learned like how to kind of adapt. But what's something that you found similar in all these cultures? Like what's like a similar value that was held up in like no matter where you were in the globe?
That's a great question, too. No one's ever asked that. Um, what's Everyone wants the same things. Everyone wants to have people who love them. They want to have a stable environment. They want to feel like they belong. I guess if you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there's certain things that all humans want. But yeah, people want to be loved. They want to be heard, valued, accepted. They're giving to other people when they have that love. When they're full, they give to others, right? And that's something that I find in every culture.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Yeah. And then I was also wondering, so we read a lot about your Cultures magazine. What's like your initial like purpose for the magazine and your key takeaway for like our like viewers or anyone reading it?
So, the purpose of cultures is to enhance human connection or foster human connection and enhance community for people who are culturally fluid. So people who grew up in multiple countries or meaningfully experiencing multiple cultures. And that's important for the reasons that we just talked about, right? Uh, I happen to have more dimensions to my cultural fluidity than most, but a lot of people have that. So Barack Obama is another example. He and I have between 9 and 10 different dimensions to our cultural fluidity. There's 13 dimensions in total. So that's a lot, right? That's a lot of places. You're a TCK, you're multi-ethnic. In his case, or you could be multiracial. Like all of these are different layers to you and different parts of you. And someone may have one or two layers, so they get those parts of you, but then they might not get the rest, right? So really creating and fostering that connection and enhancing community, that's what we're all about.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I feel like that's so interesting, especially regarding like making new connections and understanding like what it is that a person like the experiences that they hold. And I was just wondering, like, when you meet somebody new who kind of has like that same culture or has like similar experiences to you, do you like experience like a connection that's similar to that?
Well, you guys have the best questions. Oh my gosh. So, yes, I call it this invisible magnet. Like, usually I'll be somewhere and I just feel this pull to talk to this person, and you hit it off right away. And now it's happened so many times that I kind of recognize it. So then I'll be like, I wonder what their story is. And lo and behold, they end up being a third culture kid, or they can end up being culturally fluid. And so, yeah, there's some magnetism. I wish I knew what it is, how it is, why it is, but it does happen. And I mention it to people and they always agree. And it's interesting. And I love that because, like I said, when I was 35, I read this book, and that book was given to me, and it was told to me, oh, there's this thing called third culture kid. And so that was so helpful. That's really why we created cultures in terms of creating that community, because I wanted other people to have that same helpfulness, to have that same identification and knowledge that there's other people like them. So because of what I do, I get to go all around the world. I just did a podcast with Gabriel Schmidt. He is the chief creative officer of Gray, which is one of the biggest advertising agencies in the world. And he's a TCK and didn't know it. So they're always fascinated when I'm like, oh yeah, this means this, and this is how you feel. And they're like, wait, what? Are you in my mind? It's like, nope, it's just part of your culture. You just didn't realize, so it's fun. Not everyone's like me. We don't go all ham and crazy and create a whole company around it, but it's nice to have the connections with the people. And you can see in their eyes that it's this knowing, it's this wonderful feeling of, oh, this person gets me. Yeah.
Yeah, I kind of understand that. One time I went on a mission trip to Turkey and I met a lot of kids who were TCKs, and it was such an incredible experience, just kind of understanding like what they got to learn from where they live, and just kind of coming together to understand like each other's cultures and backgrounds. And so yeah, I definitely think there's something special about meeting with TCKs.
I love that. Well, Turkey was one of the countries I grew up in, so it has a special place in my heart. And so it's funny because now it has this, I don't want to say resurgence, I guess a surgence, where people all over are all about Turkey now. But it's my favorite place in the world, and it has been since I was 12 years old. So I'm glad you got to have that experience. And with TCKs, I mean, what's better?
Yeah. So I kind of wanted to ask a question, kind of shifting gears a little bit. So in a quote from Connecting Global Media, you said how many people often mix up diversity, race, and culture. Why do you think that people find this like so confusing, and why do you think it gets confused so often?
It's interesting. I was watching a podcast last night, Diary of a CEO podcast, with Stephen Bartlett. I don't know if you're familiar with him. I actually want to have him on my podcast. But he was interviewing, I think her name is Emma. She is the CEO of Skims and of Good American Jeans. She brought the idea to Khloe Kardashian and Kim Kardashian. Anyway, she was on his podcast. And oh, now I forgot your question. Say it again for me, please.
People often get diversity.
I remember. So she's from the UK, and Stephen Bartlett is from the UK as well, right? And she moved, I think it was 7 years ago, to the United States. And she was just saying how fortunate she feels to have grown up in the UK and not in the US, because the difference in how race is seen is very palpable, right? And I'll give you another story before I fully answer the question. Well, I'll answer the question. No, I'll give you another story first. The second story is I had interviewed the author of the book, White Fragility. Are you familiar with it?
I've heard of it before. I've never
We heard of it. Yeah, so she wrote this book and it was kind of like a bombshell. Now, and she's a white woman. She wrote this book about why, quote unquote, white people are fragile, right? And so we were chatting and she was used to working in the US. And she's actually kind of a standoffish person. She's an interesting personality, but we were chatting and she asked me about global experiences because she was just starting to go global. And she said, so having read the book and having chatted, what do you think? Do you think it's the same abroad and in the US, or do you think it's different? And I said, I think it's different. And I can't remember if I described to her why it was different, but she said, no, I think it's the same. And I thought, well, then why'd you ask the question? She's like, I think it's the same. Because, and what I think she meant is that institutionalized racism is the same everywhere, right? I don't know if, I think it might be similar everywhere, but it's not the same. And so going back to Emma's quote, both of those, I give you those as examples because going back to Emma saying, I'm really glad I grew up in the UK. If you talk to any person of color in the UK, they would say they have issues as well. However, those issues are very different than the US. In the US, it's like race is the first thing. It's always talked about. It's something, even in those communities of color, it's expected that you're that first, right? I'll give you a third example. A woman who used to work for me who was from Kenya, and she was very dark skinned. She was she was doing her master's here, and she was in a focus group where they had them fill out a pie. And in that pie chart of who you are, you had all these things that you could put, student, teacher, and then it would have your race, then it would have your occupation, and other things, right? About who you are. And you were supposed to draw in the pie which parts were bigger for you. You also were supposed to list which was the top thing for you. Of all these identifying markers of who you are, what was the top thing? For all the people in the color in the room, except for her, because everybody else was American, they put their race as the number one. And she put it at the bottom. Okay. And so then she was so confused and perplexed. I was her boss at the time. She came to talk to me. And she said, she showed me the chart and she said, where would you put it? Well, I put my race at the bottom. And she said, oh, she was so happy and she couldn't understand why everybody else, all the people of color, put theirs at the top, right? And that is, I think, the biggest illustration of the difference of what race is in the United States versus other places, right? Especially if you come from a place of color. I mean, she comes from a country with a lot of people who look like her. So race is not going to be the top of her understanding of who she is, right? I come from multiple countries, like brown countries, black countries, white countries, all other colors. And race wasn't the top of who I thought of when I thought of myself. Now, the longer I stayed in the US, the longer I taught at university, I saw that start to shift. Because in the United States, that tends to be a conversation that comes up first. And I don't know why. I don't know if it's because of our experience with racism, or not, excuse me, not racism, with slavery in the United States and how it evolved over time. But it's definitely something that has evolved in the US. And I know different groups of color, I'm Afro-Latina, so I'm part of different groups. And it's interesting too to have a foot in both of those worlds and how those worlds interact or don't interact with each other. It's not fun sometimes. And people expect you to take their side and you're on both sides. You're just like, But, when I talk about culture's focus is on culture. So if you're multiracial, you're typically multicultural, unless both of your parents come, well, even if both of your parents come from the US, if you're African American, so I'm Black, but my culture isn't African American culture. So you look at me, you hear my accent, you think, oh, she's just like me. And then we start talking about things, and about 5 or 10 minutes into the conversation, you're like, well, you think funny, you know? Well, it's because I'm not just like you. I think differently because I grew up differently. My values, we have a lot of similar values, but some that are different as well. So when you have someone who has an accent, they kind of get a pass. It's because people understand they're from somewhere else. When I look and sound like you, in the third culture kid book, they call it a hidden diversity, right? Or a hidden immigrant. Um, People think they're like that you're like them, but you think differently than they do, right? So it creates barriers, and that's another place where people need a sense of belonging and need people who understand them fully. But that's the biggest difference between race, culture, and ethnicity. Was ethnicity the third one? Yes. In ethnicity, a lot of people I've noticed, now it's a big deal to marry outside of your race. Like you see a lot of people on TikTok, a lot of people on YouTube showing their families and all so cute and everything. And I noticed that a lot of those couples say ethnicity instead of race because you could have two people who are Black or two people who are Asian or two people who are white, and they have different ethnicities, right? And so you have those cultural bonds or those cultural values that might clash, even though you have the same ethnicity. So it's really, I think, important to understand what you mean when you say each of those words. And race is just something that was created over time. It's not something that was always used in the history of the world. So for us, it's all about culture. And, culture explains how we think, what we do, even being a third culture kid. If you're culturally fluid, you could be a TCK because that is your culture. You're an amalgamation of all the cultures you lived in. So culture is where we focus.
That's
Such an it's like that like really like made me more defining those terms for me really like impacted me just like now even.
Same. Yeah.
Good.
And seeing how our time is almost up, I just have one last question to ask you. And
Sure.
why do you believe it's so important for young people today to look at issues in today as a global scope rather than a domestic one?
Interesting. Y'all with the good questions. I think our world is global. As you can see, what's happening now, we have a new administration in the United States, and these decisions that are being made don't just affect citizens of the United States, they affect citizens globally, right? We have been forging toward globalism. When I say forging toward, I mean we're in globalism, but we've been forging toward since the 20s, I would say. The First World War, Second World War, as different countries started coming together, becoming allies, working together. Now, that's something that's always happened in history. But if you look at the globalism we have today, part of it is technology, part of it is the way people think, part of it is the way people have moved. And so technology has allowed us, I mean, you can think back to the 1500s, people have moved all in different places. People don't even realize the Moors ruled Spain back in the day, right? And if we had technology where other people could connect, they could connect with people back home or easily send messages, then we would have a better idea now of what that looks like. So I think technology really has fostered this global world that we have, and we're also intertwined. Our currencies are intertwined, our manufacturing is intertwined, our families are intertwined. So it's really important to see that there are different ways of thinking and being. And that just expands your viewpoint in the world, expands your ability to understand people in the workplace, to be able to relate to other people of other cultures or other ways of thinking. It doesn't necessarily have to be other cultures because the way each of us is growing up, it's imperative that we have the ability and the empathy to see someone else, understand where they're coming from, even if we don't agree, and be able to relate to that person. It helps you thrive at work, it helps you thrive at school, and it helps you thrive as an individual because you can feel good about the relationships that you have and the interactions you have with people every day.
I completely agree.
Same.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I think that's all the time that we have today for the meeting, but thank you for telling us about like culture and showing us the impacts of it as well.